The Cabin in the Pines. 1. The Body by the Roadside. It was on a damp November morning in 1948 that Inspector Alastair Venn and I were summoned to Merringdale, a small village crouched at the edge of Greystone Forest. The summons came by telegram, 9 curt words delivered to our office in Exeter. Unidentified man shot dead. Note in pocket. Urgent. Venn read it in silence, folded it once with mathematical precision, and placed it in the inner pocket of his grey overcoat. The gesture, simple as it was, meant that his mind had already begun turning. Outside, the rain had just started. The pavements shone like tarnished glass, and the last of the autumn leaves were pasted to the cobblestones. We drove west in his aging Humber, the wipers keeping an erratic tempo against the windscreen. Ben disliked conversation on the road. He said it blurred the edges of thought. When we reached Merringdale 2 hours later, the village appeared shrunken beneath the drizzle rows of low cottages with roofs like slates of ink, a church spire half lost in fog, and beyond it, a line of dark pines climbing the hill. The constable who met us saluted nervously and led us to the scene. The body lay beside a stone wall where the lane curved towards the forest. The man was about 45, his brown overcoat sodden, a hat lying a few feet away in the mud. He had been shot through the left side of the chest. The bullet, according to the village doctor, had passed clean through. No wallet, no papers, only a few shillings and a curious object, a child's glass marble, blue with a white swirl, found in his waistcoat pocket. And a note. Ben opened the slip of paper with care, as if afraid the fog itself might smudge the words. Cabin 7, Ravenshallow Forest Lodge. Key behind lantern. No names. He stared at it for several seconds, then looked up at the dripping trees. A meeting, he murmured, or perhaps a hiding place. Could be anything, I said. Holiday cottages, maybe. Perhaps once, but not now. Look at the ink, keen fresh, written within the week. Whoever met him there expected secrecy. He pocketed both the note and the marble. Children and secrets, he said softly. They so often travel together. 2. The village inn. By dusk we had taken rooms at the Boar and Lantern, the only inn in Merringdale worth its coal fire. Its low beams and smoke-dark walls held the faint odor of ale, damp wool, and old oak. The landlord, Mr. Petter, proved a man of anxious civility, rubbing his hands upon his apron as he told us what little he knew. Yes, sir, I saw the gentleman last evening, he said. Came in quiet like, ordered tea, asked the way to Ravenshallow Forest, said he was meeting someone there, didn't give a name, spoke proper, though not a vagrant. Was he alone? Ben asked. Petter hesitated. Well, there was a lad outside, fair hair, thin, couldn't be more'n 10 or 11, waited in the rain till the gentleman came out. They walked off toward the woods. Ben's eyes sharpened. You're certain of that? As certain as I am of standing here, sir. I remember thinking it odd a child out so late. Describe the boy. Small, wore a cap pulled low, looked frightened, if you ask me. Ben thanked him, then sat long after the landlord left, staring into the fire. A man dead, a child missing, and a cabin waiting in the forest, he said at last. The pattern draws itself. We set out before dawn. 3. The Cabin in the Pines. The road into Greystone Forest was little more than a cart track, slick with mud. Mist drifted between the trunks, the air smelt of resin and decay. Ravenshallow Lodge lay half a mile in, a cluster of timber cabins built before the wharf for summer visitors and now abandoned. Only one still bore a number on the door, 7. The key, as promised by the note, hung behind the rusted lantern by the entrance. Ben unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was cold and stale. A kettle rested on the iron stove, and near it, 2 enamel mugs, one with a crust of tea at the bottom. Someone had been here recently. And then we saw the blanket in the corner. It moved. Beneath it was a child, a boy of perhaps 10, pale and trembling, his wrists marked by rope. His eyes were wide with terror until he saw Venn kneel beside him. It's all right, my boy, the inspector said softly. You're safe now. What is your name? Peter, came the whisper. He was thin as a reed, his clothes damp and torn. There were crumbs of bread on the floor, an empty water jug on the table, and beside it, most damning of all, a small pistol. Ben lifted it delicately by the barrel. .32 caliber Webley, he murmured. Still smells of powder. The boy began to cry, quietly, hopelessly. Tell me, Peter, Ben said. Was there another man here? He nodded. 2 men. One brought me here. The other came later. They shouted. I was scared. The gun was on the table. I just wanted it to stop. The simplicity of it chilled me more than any confession could. We brought the child back to the village infirmary. The constables searched the remaining cabins but found only traces, footprints, a rope, a child's shoe under a bunk. No sign of the second man. That night, the wind rose, rattling the shutters of the inn. Ben sat by the window, the pistol dismantled before him, his face unreadable. 1 bullet fired, he said. But look here, 2 sets of fingerprints. 1 small, 1 narrow, but adult. Someone else touched this weapon after the shot. I felt the skin crawl at the back of my neck. Then the boy may have fired, he said. Or been guided to. He looked out into the darkness where the forest began. There is more behind this, Keen, far more. The cabin in the pines, far. The man named Denton. Morning came bleak and colorless. A low mist still clung to the meadows behind the inn, and the only sound was the rattle of milk bottles in the lane. Ven rose before dawn, shaved with icy water, and announced that we were returning to the constabulary. Inspector Holt, the local man in charge, greeted us with the air of one relieved to hand over responsibility. He had already wired London for fingerprints, but Ven had little patience for bureaucracy. He wanted to see the evidence. The dead man's possessions were laid out on a table: mud-stained coat, cracked watch, a cheap fountain pen, and the marble. Ben examined the pen first, unscrewing the cap. A name was faintly engraved on the barrel. C. Denton. Charles Denton, Holt said. Lodged at the railway inn 2 nights ago. Paid cash, no papers. Ben nodded slowly. A man with a false life leaves his real name where he thinks no one will look. He paced the narrow room. Denton brought the boy here, perhaps others before him. But the note in his pocket suggests he came to meet someone. Who rents a cabin in a forest for conversation? Someone with things to hide. The constable produced a weathered notebook found beneath the lining of the dead man's overcoat. Inside were addresses, mostly illegible, but one entry remained clear. Ravenshallow 7, 10 November. Delivery confirmed. GL. Ven repeated. 2 letters that may yet cost a man his life. 5. The second visitor. We took luncheon in the small parlor of the Boar and Lantern. The fire smoked, and the smell of mutton stew hung in the air. Peter, the rescued boy, was being kept at the parsonage under the care of Mrs. Holt, a kind woman whose eyes filled whenever his name was spoken. His story is incomplete, Ben said between spoonfuls. He heard an argument but saw only shadows. Denton and another man, GL, perhaps quarreled. The shot followed. But why leave the boy alive? To shift blame? I asked. Possibly. Or mercy, which is rarer. He smiled thinly. I shall speak with the vicar this evening. In villages, Keen, confession often travels faster than post. At dusk the church bell tolled the Angelus. The vicar, Reverend Symes, was a man of nervous piety whose spectacles fogged when he talked. He remembered Denton well, came to service last Sunday, sat in the back pew, afterwards asked about rooms for a relative who might be traveling, seemed troubled, asked whether the forest cabins were still let. I told him they'd been empty since the war. Did he mention a companion? Ben asked. Symes frowned. Only that a porter friend from London might join him. A Mr. Leake, I believe he said. The name struck Ven like a spark. Leake, he repeated softly. Graham Leake, dismissed from the railway in '43 for theft. Questioned in a missing child case the following year. He rose, offered his hand to the startled vicar, and said only, "You have given us a sermon worth hearing, Reverend." 6. The letter in the ashes. We returned to cabin 7 before nightfall. The constables had sealed it, but Ven persuaded them to let us inspect once more. The forest was still wet from rain, the air heavy with the scent of pine tar. Inside, Ben crouched beside the hearth. Ashes, he murmured, but not of wood. He sifted them carefully with a penknife. Among the gray flakes lay the corner of a burnt envelope. The remaining fragment showed a crest, 2 interlocked letters, GL, and the faint words Central Rail Depot. He slipped it into a paper sleeve. Our porter friend again. He came here after the killing, tried to destroy his correspondence, and failed. The rain must have put out the fire before it was done. As we turned to leave, Ben paused by the door. Keen, notice the marks on the sill. Scratched into the damp wood were 3 small lines and a curve like a child's attempt at a letter A. Peter's work, I suggested. Or another child's, Ben said. There were 2 mugs on that table, and 2 sets of crumbs. Peter spoke only of himself. Where is the second? We stood silent, listening to the wind through the pines. Far off, a dog barked twice and fell silent. Ben closed the door and turned the key in the lock. Tomorrow we shall ask the forest what else it remembers. The cabin in the pines. 7. The silent schoolmistress. By the next morning the drizzle had turned to a fine, persistent rain. Marringdale seemed smaller under its chimneys smoking, puddles pooling along the cobbled main street. Ben and I took our tea in the parlor while the constable brought news. No trace of this leak in the district, sir, he said. But old Miss Cray from the schoolhouse says she saw a stranger on the footpath by Greystone Bridge 2 nights ago. Tall, coat torn, pushing a bicycle. Ven stirred his tea without looking up. Miss Cray, he said, is she the sort who notices what others overlook? She's near blind, sir, but sharp as a pin in mind. Excellent, Ben said. Let us pay her a visit. The schoolmistress lived in a cottage leaning perilously toward the lane, its front garden a tangle of hollyhocks long since defeated by frost. She received us with fierce curiosity. Stranger, you say? Ben prompted. I did, she replied. Passed my gate Monday evening just as the bell struck 7, pushing a bicycle with a sack strapped to it. Mud to his knees. He asked the way to Exeter Road and whether the forest lodges were still open. His accent was London. Rough sort. Ben's brows lifted. Did he say anything else? Yes, he said. Can't leave the second one here. Too dangerous. Then off he went into the rain. The old woman's words hung in the air like frost. Ben rose, his eyes bright. The second one, keen. He meant a child. We must search the forest again. 8. The girl in the woods. We set out before noon with 2 constables, a dog, and a sense of grim anticipation. The rain had ceased, but the air was thick with mist. The forest closed around us, silent except for the occasional crack of a branch. 2 miles north of cabin 7 lay the ruins of an old shepherd's hut. The dog barked suddenly, tail stiff. Inside, among moldy hay and rusted tin, crouched a little girl. She could not have been more than 8. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, and her bare feet raw with cold. She shrank at the sight of us until Ven knelt and offered his hand. You're safe, child, he said softly. We shan't harm you. What is your name? Alice, she whispered. Her story came haltingly, broken by shivers. A man she called Mr. Charles had brought her to the forest weeks before, promising to send her home to her mother. Then another man, the one with the bicycle and the red hands, had come often, arguing with Mr. Charles. One night there was shouting, a gunshot, and she had run until the forest swallowed her. Ben listened without interruption, then wrapped her in his coat. We found our missing chapter, he murmured. We returned to the village, where the doctor pronounced Alice weak but unharmed. Peter, when told she was safe, wept silently. The 2 children were kept together at the parsonage, clinging to each other like survivors of a storm. That evening, Ven spread a map of the district across our table. Denton Mr. Charles dies here, he said, marking a cross. Cabin 7 stands here. Leak flees by bicycle toward Exeter. But where does he hide? He cannot reach the city unnoticed. He traced a finger along the narrow canal road. There's an abandoned lime kiln near the water, roofed, dry, invisible from the lane. If I were hunted, that is where I'd sleep. 9. The lime kiln. We reached the kiln after dusk, lanterns throwing trembling circles of light. The opening gaped black and wet, smelling of soot and rain. Ben entered first, revolver drawn. A shape stirred in the shadows, a man's shape. Then a glint of metal. The shot cracked like thunder. Dust showered from the roof. When our eyes cleared, Graham Leake was sprawled against the wall, bleeding from his shoulder. He cursed us in a harsh Cockney drawl. "You've no proof, you bastards." "On the contrary," Ben said, stepping forward, "we have quite enough." He recited the litany calmly: the burnt letter, the ledger from Denton's coat, the bicycle tracks, Miss Cray's testimony. Each word struck like a hammer. Leake sagged, beaten by logic more than by pain. He went soft, that's all, he muttered. "Kept the brats too long. Said he'd take one away, start over. I warned him it'd ruin us. He laughed, called me a coward. So I let the boy have the gun. Said if he was scared, he should point it at me. The fool fired at Denton instead. The lad screamed, I bolted. You can hang me, but I never pulled that trigger." Ben said nothing for a long while. Then he turned to me. "Keen, note that carefully. He let the boy have the gun. Conscience by proxy." Leake was taken away under guard. The forest seemed quieter after his voice was gone. 10. Epilogue. The weight of innocence. The case concluded in a flurry of headlines. Forest fiend captured. Children saved from bang. The papers praised the swift and methodical work of Inspector Venn. None spoke of the silence that followed. Peter and Alice were placed with distant relatives. Venn visited once. The boy clung to his hand but said nothing. Perhaps silence was mercy. On our last evening in Merringdale, the inn was nearly empty. Rain pattered softly against the window panes. Ben sat by the fire, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. "You're thinking of the boy," I said. "Of the boy," he replied, "and of Leake's words. He let the boy have the gun. It may be the most terrible kindness I've ever heard." He rose, took his hat, and we walked out into the mist. The forest loomed dark and patient beyond the fields. "Do you believe in justice, Keen?" he asked suddenly. "I try to." He smiled faintly. "Then remember this: sometimes justice wears the smallest hands." We drove away in silence, leaving the pines to their endless whispering.